Wow, it works better when you play it, Reid. Huh. I wonder what's going on with my computer. I've been having trouble with that countdown thing, sticking and causing difficulties. So I'm working through it. Hi, everybody. We got Will. We got Janos.
Will. Hello.
And who are you?
I'm Reid.
Oh,
I think I've seen him before.
Yep.
Vaguely familiar. We are here today to review a video that William did with Jonathan. Is that his name? Jonathan?
Yeah.
His last name is Conversation One. No, that's that. I misread that. And in this case, you spoke with Jonathan. There was 2 conversations, and links are in the description for all of those things. Why are we reviewing this particular conversation? What's interesting about it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, actually, the thing that's interesting about this conversation, I think, is Jonathan. I didn't know anything. I'd never spoken to Jonathan before we did this interview. So this was the first time of us communicating. We arranged to do the interview over text chat, and I'm sort of usually up for talking to anybody. And was kind of you'll hear me be a bit uncertain about Jonathan at the beginning. I could, just trying to feel my way with regards to where he was. And what his views were, and it's a really interesting view. And the more I spoke to Jonathan, the more I really enjoyed the conversation. Like, he's really open. He has some really interesting perspectives, and just being able to explore those with him was just a real pleasure. And I think it's a good example of, we definitely seem to believe some very fundamentally different things. But actually, we ended up having a really, I think, productive and empathetic conversation. And I think that's what made me really enjoy this conversation. I'm not sure if it's SE for a few reasons. Like, I definitely enter the conversation with my perspectives, especially towards the end. And I don't know that I really ever intended for this to be an SE conversation. But it definitely has a lot of SE characteristics. But I was just keen to hear your thoughts on how SE this was. But it's an interview, it's a conversation with a stranger, which is the sort of thing I like doing. But it's not specifically. It was never a prearranged claim or anything like that. We were just sort of feeling our way with the conversation.
All right. I will look for opportunities to for and against SE. Then
that would be cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I have not seen this at all, so this will be new for me.
Yeah, have you seen it? Go ahead.
I have not seen it.
You guys even subscribed? Oh my god!
No,
I have.
I saw it.
I mean, I might have seen it,
And I watched it an extra time for Janos.
I joke.
I might have watched it if I cared, but I don't. So,
fair, totally fair. I deserve all of this and more. I know.
So,
I know.
William, maybe you can give us your very briefly your definition of when is it SE and when is it not SE.
Shoot. Like, I think SE is like, I guess what I'm talking about when I say it's not SE is like this kind of classical SE where you go out with a specific aim of having an SE conversation about a particular claim, and that you remain your views are not relevant to the conversation, like ideally. And I think I tried to keep to that mostly for the most of the conversation, although there are parts where that breaks down somewhat, if I remember correctly. But yeah, I think also the objective of this conversation isn't necessarily to challenge his epistemology on a lot of the conversation. And that's another thing that I'm interested in understanding from you guys, whether you think that made it a not SE conversation, because there were some very strong claims that I very deliberately ignored in this conversation.
Okay. I'm going to score it as against SE on 3 rules. Are you inspiring reflection? Call back. Are you causing, or are you working toward reflection in the claimant? That's the one. The second one is rapport going well? If rapport goes poorly, then and then the third one, because you really like neutrality, I'm going to say if a lack of neutrality causes defensive reaction, that'll be a down look. So those are the 3 that I'm going to count.
Interesting.
Down.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think there was any point where either of us were being defensive. I do think there were points where
I'm going to decide that. Right.
Let's. Yeah, I think that's a perfectly fair set of criteria. It's an interesting set of criteria, but yeah. Okay.
I just find it interesting that I think there's probably two ways to judge whether or not a conversation is SE. One is what is actually happening, the outcome, and one is the intention behind it.
Mhm.
And we can't speak for your intentions, William, during the conversation, because I think someone could be doing SE and maybe the interview not go well, and they will damage the rapport, and it would still be SE, would still qualify as SE.
Yeah,
But, But I think the moment where the intent changes to just having a debate or putting out your own arguments for your own position, I guess that's when it actually stops being SE.
I guess the focus of attention on the epistemology of the claims is the main thing that this particular interview doesn't address. It does touch on it, and we do ask. There are some, I think, fairly classic questions and SE, certainly SE inspired. But I think mostly that the places where it will feel less SE is that I'm not necessarily focusing on the epistemology, and I specifically don't do that in a place. And I when we get to that point, I'd like to ask your thoughts on it. And again, me just injecting my views as I am wont to do. So yes, cool. That sounds good.
All right. Do you guys have the ability to play and pause, or is that only me?
That's just you, I'm afraid.
Let's see.
So just start talking or waving. Oh, someone did.
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. You do.
Cool.
Yeah, that's another benefit of being a member on this SE account on StreamYard. So we'll get you set up for that later. Well, all right. Anyway.
Cool. Yeah.
Here we go.
Okay, so let's kick off. So Jonathan, you say that you used to be an atheist. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that would have been over a decade ago. I'm 33 now. But probably like from 19 to 21, I was an atheist.
Right. Oh, okay. So you were a theist, and before that, is that right?
Yeah, I was on my own when I was like 17. I went to Southern Baptist Church, and then I was very religious then, but I think I saw the pitfalls in the religion, so I just reverted all the way to atheist.
Okay.
And then when I was 21, I couldn't quite go stay atheist, so I switched to a theist, just as an agnostic,
Okay. So when if it's okay to ask, what did you believe as you were growing up? Did you have a family belief, or did you believe something when you were younger, or?
Yeah, so till the age I was 10, we were Catholic, and then we left church. So for most of my teenage years, I really wasn't involved in religion at all.
Right. I should say at the beginning here that Jonathan did want to appear on video, but unfortunately his internet connection wasn't up to it. So unfortunately he's not going to appear. But the other thing is that I think in the preamble, like he mentioned that he used to be an atheist. And I think that he'd heard me speak in a Discord conversation and reached out to me because he thought that I would be an interesting person to talk to, but he'd never sort of outlined what it was he wanted to talk about. And so I didn't want to make the assumption that his religion was the topic, or and the other thing I was trying to be careful of, and I don't know how well I do here, but like I wanted to be careful of like those sort of very small verbal cues when you hear somebody say like, I'm a Catholic. I didn't want to be dismissive. I just want to okay, I got you. Like I hear what you're saying, but I don't want to sound like, oh, okay. Like, because sometimes I've heard people do that when somebody says, oh, I'm an atheist. Oh, okay. I now know everything there is to know about you. It's really hard. So I'm not sure how well I succeed in that, but like, I think it's certainly worth trying to give those sort of soft acknowledgements as without judgment.
I have to stuff myself down really hard when somebody says, I used to be an atheist.
Right.
Because the majority of times I've heard that, it turns out to be, and I'm exaggerating here, my hyperbole is you were an atheist for 15 minutes between when you grew up and you got really serious.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm that's hyperbole, but very, very often the claim I used to be an atheist is excessive or
Right.
And do you find that when people say that, what they mean is not really, there was a time when I did not believe in any gods, but they mean there was a time when I thought it would be a good idea to stop doing that?
I've seen it across the whole spectrum. Some people who were genuinely in all the ways we would accept atheist for a time, and then I also hear somebody strongly theist, a few percent of doubt for a little while, and then they call themselves an atheist when they're referring back to that time, because they were less than a full believer, and I think it's rhetorical. I think it's trying to compel people into kind of an us and them framework. I don't need to worry about the motivations, because my whole job when I'm faced with that is to actually just not react.
Yeah, exactly. In any case, yeah, I think it's dangerous to make too many assumptions, and I think in this space, when a lot of the stories are very familiar, it can become quite easy to make assumptions.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Like in either case, just listen to what's being said as carefully as possible, and don't react.
Yeah, the Pine Creek theorem runs through my head each time. So what was her name? Who was the person that you were really into when you changed your mind? Something like that, which again happens some of the time, and it's not universal, and I don't want to be distracting by going down that road.
Yeah,
it is playing out in my head.
All right, let's keep going.
Catholic, teenage years, kind of not really involved in religion, became Baptist for a period of time.
Yeah, for about years.
And then that didn't work for you, and then you became an atheist, and then about 10 years ago you became a theist again. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess. Well, about 10 years ago, I guess I was technically agnostic.
Right.
Like I just left it as like, well, I don't know,
Gotcha.
I would say in November I had a religious experience, and that's when I became a theist again.
Okay. Is it a particular denomination of theism that you believe after you had that experience, or do you just have a belief in a god or deity?
See, yeah, here's the thing. Like sometimes I'm open to the idea of monotheism, and also open to the idea of polytheism.
Right.
Or something like a force, or I guess like not. I guess possibly that may not even be an entity, just a system, of rules, kind of, possibly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There are definitions of God that, excuse me, there are definitions of God that get complicated, for sure. So just looking back at this sort of personal experience that you had then that brought you back into a sort of theistic mindset. If that personal experience hadn't occurred to you, do you think you would still be a theist today?
I would actually probably still call myself agnostic.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean this is a big thing with it. I was actually in a manic phase when it happened. Like I was only sleeping like 2 hours a night for like 3 weeks, and I was definitely high energy to the point where sometimes it felt like I was on a drug.
Right.
And yeah, at one point I really felt like I saw this bright light, and I wasn't aware I was in a manic state when all this was happening. But after I came off of it, I sat and I was like trying to decide whether I believe in it or not. And I know after that experience, I now believe that good is a thing. Like before that, I was probably more nihilistic philosophy-wise. Or are you familiar with the term hedonistic?
Hedonist, yes, absolutely, yeah.
And
Can I?
So I was more hedonistic.
Just pause here. I feel like that was an obvious instance where he just asked, "Are you familiar with the term?" And you just say, "Yeah, I know it." I feel I should have asked for his definition instead of just saying, "Yeah, I know what it is," because you have heard the term, you have an idea in your head what you think it is. You don't know if that matches with what he thinks it is. And I felt the same about atheism and agnosticism. I would have asked him, what exactly do you mean? What is agnosticism for you? What is atheism for you? What is theism?
It's a good question. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think as regards to the question about hedonism, I was kicking myself because he pronounced it the American way, hedonism. The English pronunciation is hedonism. So when he said it, I mentally corrected it and said it out loud as if I was confirming that that's what it was. And then I realized I was correcting his punctuation and immediately stopped because I didn't want to do that because that wasn't useful. And I think at that point I probably stopped thinking about anything other than just like giving him elocution lessons. Yes, I think that's a really good point. I think the more we check definitions,
it's pronounced elocution lessons.
the more I think the more we check the definitions, the more we learn how valuable checking definitions are, because a lot of bad conversations end up happening because we assume those definitions. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
Error. Yeah, nihilistic at points. But now I'm definitely like that there is a good, and I don't know, I guess I believe the idea that like there's by really choosing good, that cosmic forces will help out in some way. And
okay.
And by good, I mean truth, finding truth in scenarios from all perspectives, finding beauty in things.
At this point, he's made quite a lot of actual claims about the nature of the experience, like the experience that he's had with the light, and conclusions that he's derived from that experience. And it felt like there were these sort of a lot of these rabbit holes that we could go down, or a lot of conversations that could come off from here. But again, because this wasn't an SE conversation, there wasn't a point where at this point I really wanted to say, okay, can we pick one claim to explore? I also felt that I really respected his self-awareness when he said he was in a manic state and he hadn't been sleeping when he had this experience of seeing the light. And so I thought, whilst it's certainly, I think he would be very open to the idea that there may be other explanations for the presence of the light other than a deity. I didn't know that for sure at this point, but I suspected that wouldn't be that. Any reasonable person might agree that if you've already acknowledged that you've not been sleeping and you're in a manic state, then I think things can feel real that aren't perhaps real. So the thing that I was kind of intrigued about was his awareness of goodness as a thing, because it sort of I felt like it touched on something more important to his well-being, is his relationship with the concept of goodness, and that's kind of the rabbit I chose to chase, which is, I think, an unusual move in an SE conversation, right? Like, it would be more, how does he know the things he is experiencing were real? But I was kind of curious about this concept of goodness.
Yeah, in my mind, I'm hearing an argument map developing for the claim God exists, and one reason is his own personal experience. Another reason is the moral argument, almost like good exists, and the best explanation for the existence of good or values is a God.
Yeah, he touched on that, but I don't think. There are plenty of classic SE conversations that are available here for sure.
Yep.
Could your experience of the bright light, could you have been mistaken about the nature of that bright light, and yet things like truth and goodness still be things that exist in the world?
Yes.
And when you say that good is in the world, what do you mean by a good in that sense? How do you feel that the word what do you feel the word good means in this sense?
I feel that was a missed opportunity.
Okay.
He said yes, yes, I would have just paused and said nothing and see what he would have followed
Oh.
up with.
Yeah, let him expand on that notion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that he answered twice. I'm going to score you down on style for asking a compound question that he
Yep.
had to give 2 answers to. This is such minor irrelevancies.
What
Please-
was the compound question I asked him? You're doubtlessly correct. I'm just trying to think what the compound question. Oh, is it possible that it was true that his experience of the light was not real, and yet goodness and truth still exist in the world?
Yeah.
I don't think that was a
It's not
compound question.
but he took it as such. It obviously didn't hurt rapport. It didn't hurt comprehension. So obviously it's fine.
I think I read his double yes as an initial yes as a superficial placeholder in the conversation, and then a follow-up yes affirming that he was confident that that's what he wanted to say.
Okay, sure.
But yeah,
Interesting. I thought it was I thought the first yes was with a bit of a question mark. Still thinking about it. Still thinking, yes, I believe so. Now that I think about it, yes. That is my
that's what I
final
thought.
answer.
Yeah, that was my take.
Yeah. But I do think, like, you could have asked first the question, is it possible that you could have been mistaken about the nature of this experience, or the nature of the experience? And then as a follow-up question, ask the question, if hypothetically you were mistaken about that, would it still be possible that truth
Sure.
and good in the world? Well,
Sure, true. Yeah, fair point.
Yeah. Now, I guess before that scenario, I would have saw that good. Well, before that scenario, I guess I would have kind of saw as animals, and that like people who are more dominant, like, love the word good and love to tell people to act good, and like a lot of times they use the word good as like being submissive, so I didn't really like the word good. But now I see it as there is actual good in the sense of I don't have a high degree of.
Yeah, this is actually really interesting. This is like where like the conversation shifted into a very different gear for me. What he's saying, and I think I will clarify in a moment, but like I think what he's saying is like he saw good as like a relationship to I guess an expression of your conformity to a system or a hierarchy. So you are good if you follow the rules. Goodness is acting in line with the norms. It's about what's it, not the subservience, but it's about falling in line, I guess. So that's I thought that was a really interesting definition of good, actually. There's some really interesting characteristics of that I thought I really liked. And that he's now saying that he sort of sees that there's something good external to just that type of good. So it's not a judgmental good. It's not a character, sort of assessment and evaluational good. It's more of a case of that there's something that is almost in the aesthetic of good that is external, which I thought was quite interesting. I just thought it was really interesting, a point that he brought up.
Yeah, I think in a high control situation, getting people to agree on the goodness of that control is the first necessary step.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, like if you think about a parental relationship, for example, like, the child is good when it's being quote unquote well behaved. It's bad when it's misbehaving.
Yeah.
And actually, I think really early on, that is how we learn about the concept of good and bad. Good is what is approved of, and bad is what is not approved of.
Yeah.
And by definition, there's an approver and a disapprover and things. And so, it is hierarchical, and like good people follow the rules. Bad people break the rules. This is kind of an interesting reflection, I think, on the nature of good. And but as I say, this was his initial view of what goodness was, and then I think he's now suggesting that he's through this experience he's had, he's become more open to the almost like an aesthetic form of good in the world, a sort of beautiful form of good in the world that he can see.
Now you got Billie Eilish stuck in my head.
Oh, I do apologize.
Sense of, I don't have a high degree of certainty here, but I would say that there is a good that is absolute potentially.
Okay, that's cool. So I hear that you used to feel that good meant something like complying to some dominance requirement, right? That it was and so you were good if you fell in line. Am I understanding that correctly? You were good if you followed the rules and obeyed.
Exactly. Yeah, and I saw being good as a bad thing.
Right. Okay. And now you've come to have a different understanding of the term good. How would you characterize this new type of goodness?
See, like, I guess I'm gonna step back for a second. Like, I guess I see it as like, let's say life is a game, and in this game, the whole game is just figuring out the rules. So it's like, I guess I see it. I'm having a hard time defining good because to me right now, the whole objective is just figuring it out. But I guess I see it as, I'll tell you this. I think the big part of it is being able to see another person for who they are, letting them exist, while at the same time allowing myself to exist.
Right. I think that sounds like a good way to think about things for sure. As in, I dislike that because I feel like I'm evaluating it immediately. Like, and I think I'm trying to encourage him by saying that, because I actually liked what he said. I thought that was an interesting framing. I'd not heard it before, and again, a lot of this felt quite original at this point. I'd not heard anybody say it in that way. I don't know if any of you guys have had similar conversations or heard echoes of this from any other groups, or people. But yeah, I really liked it, and I wanted to encourage him to be open and feel comfortable. But I also felt like I was judging him in that conversation, which I was kind of I'm not sure I liked.
I'm going to judge you right now.
Right, do it.
I'm going to judge that I liked your opportunity to jump on providing positive feedback. You found an area in which your thinking agreed with his in terms of how you thought about it. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you don't think of goodness in exactly the same sense, but you liked his approach to the thing. And giving compliments on somebody's approach is I think very welcome, and is not going to generate defensive-ness, and doesn't even necessarily expose your position away from neutrality.
I'm gonna one up you and judge both of you, Dali and William.
Oh God, what is Reid gonna say? Christ.
We'll see. I think there's at least a risk in providing even positive feedback and agreeing with your interlocutor. One, because if next time you don't agree with them, they could see that as, oh, you're disagreeing with me.
Mm-hmm.
Because last time when I said something that you liked, you said that. Now you didn't say it, so I guess you don't like it. And two, I think when you're doing SE, the idea is that you're not. You want them to reflect on their reasoning. You don't want them to say something because they think you may like it or that you will agree with them. So I think even positive feedback should ideally not be given.
Yeah, that was my take. I appreciate what you're saying, Dali, and I think it's an area that I find difficult because I honestly felt like Jonathan was being as open and as honest as he could be at this point. Like he's being really open, and he's clearly thinking about what he's trying to say and reflecting in like sentence by sentence, and I think that's just fantastic. And I kind of it was a sense of wanting to say, hey, look, yeah, that sounds cool. Like, you know, like I liked what he said. I thought that was quite a nice sentiment. The idea that goodness was allowing others to exist whilst at the same time allowing himself to exist, and I think that's quite a beautiful sentiment. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I did feel, I don't know if I felt at the time, but I know I did feel shortly after when I watched it, I did look back and think, it would have been perhaps an opportunity to remain more neutral. But yeah, it's an interesting one.
No, I'm curious. Sorry.
You first.
I'm curious what Reid thinks. What do you think? How do you feel about
we're all wrong, and he's going to leave now.
I would lean towards more of neutrality and not giving any kind of feedback, especially for, like that, like where it gives an example of a definition more so than a definition. I mean, it's not too bad, but yeah, ideally being more neutral.
Yeah. Was it an example of a definition? It was like he was giving it as an. Oh yeah, you're right. It's an example of how he's seeing it rather than an actual strict definition of the answer. Yeah.
He said something like being able to see a person as who they are and letting myself exist. That's not really a definition, more examples.
Yeah, it's more of an example, I guess. You're right. Yeah, makes sense.
I couldn't see his video. I do expect that his eyes were doing spiders on the ceiling. I saw a lot of evidence of reflection and aporia even while he continued to speak.
Yeah, I don't think that's me. I think that's him. I think he seems like he was really interested in talking this out with somebody and wanted to think it through and was doing. I commend it. I really enjoyed this conversation with him, and it just got better the longer it went on. There are so many threads, as I say, that appeared to pull on. It was kind of an embarrassment of riches in terms of where the conversation could go. I guess ultimately at the end of this, it would be interesting to hear if you guys felt like the path was the one that was worth wandering down. But yeah, it's cool. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
If I could offer a suggested definition of good, I guess
something
that optimizes for better outcomes.
I don't know why I did that. That was even worse. Sorry, I don't know why I did that. I didn't need to do it.
Yeah,
I think I was helping. I was trying to help him, and I was trying to help him find a way to express what he was trying to say. And actually, that was a terrible definition anyway. It was just straight hot garbage right there.
Minus 5 points.
Minus 50 points at least, I'd say. But yeah.
Could we maybe think about that as a definition of good? How would you feel about that definition in relation to how you currently think about good?
Yeah, I mean, my struggle with that definition is because it talks about better outcomes. Because a lot of folks might see a better outcome as like, well, I'll tell you this: a big thing I noticed.
Yeah, that's a consequential utilitarian. But God definitions are deontological. It's right there in the word deontological.
It was a lazy and dumb definition. I really have no idea where it came from. Yeah. Another 50 points. It confused him as well. Sorry, you could hear it disrupted him as well because it wasn't coming from him. He was having to parse it and reflect on what I was saying, and then he was probably doing some calculation about how rude he wanted to be about my attempt to help clarify. Such a disruptive thing to say, but yeah. Such cringe.
Like, if we want peace, people should just stop complaining. And I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because people's complaints might be valid. So I guess,
right.
So with that definition of a better, how did you define it as better outcomes? Because to them, their idea of a better outcome is different than mine in that scenario.
Right. So I think a lot of people said, so now I guess we would just talk about the difference between subjective good and objective good. So
just firstly, like, are you comfortable with the term subjective and objective, as in one is about personal experience and the other is like a truth about the world?
Okay, we pause
Yeah,
there. So
and
firstly,
I'm
just to
fine
let
with
everybody know that there is some weird audio distortion in the video recording. So that wasn't anything technical going on here. That was just apparently in the original video. So I think I was both stripping over my words and internet lagging at the same time, which is a fantastic exercise in clarity. The second thing is, like, my shorthand definition of subjective and objective there. I wondered if how you felt about that.
I feel you shouldn't have given any definitions at all.
You should have asked him. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm with Janos. Offering definitions early is it's at most a waste of time. I don't think in this case it generated any particular defensiveness. He was a great sport about it.
He's getting Myro into my own video. How is this happening? Like,
Yeah, I'm just mapping out what I'm hearing. And I'm saying two bad definitions of good, your better outcomes one and his old one. And he has some examples of good up there. And that relates to his main reason of God existing because of good existing. That's just what I'm thinking in my head.
yeah, we will get back to that. That's clearly his key. That's where the meat of the conversation ends up becoming, which is like, what is the nature of his reasons for thinking that God is the reason for good to exist in the world. But yeah, right now it's a little bit unsure as to where to go.
Yeah, it's good to define it.
I'm still reeling from, if we want peace, we just have to stop complaining.
No, that wasn't that was his caricature of a certain perspective. It wasn't his.
Oh,
statement.
okay. Because I'm like,
No.
ow. Who agrees with you? So you must be wrong.
No, he was pointing out the silliness of that position. It was like it was. Yeah.
Okay, good.
But what position was that supposed to be a caricature of?
So I think I was asking a question about the nature of. It was my lazy definition of goodness, which was like a sort of something about it resulting in better outcomes. Good is what results in better outcomes, and he was reflecting on that. And then I think he was saying if we're having that, then it depends. You're sort of giving a virtue to who decides on what is a better outcome, and that's when he made that comment.
Oh, okay. So
Which I think is a fair rebuttal.
You think?
I thought at the time. Maybe you'll tell me it's not.
Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Like,
the problem with utilitarian is the subjectivity of it.
Sure. Yeah.
You control the video, Dali. You click add to stream.
Did I?
I'm asking you to control it now while I deal with Miro stuff.
Okay.
Reid, I'm
shit,
curious.
Real.
I would say.
Sorry.
I will do so.
Yeah.
Reid,
when you listen to these conversations, what you just showed us in Miro, is that what always happens in your head? Do you structure that in your head?
That's
Basically.
the PR version of it. I guarantee you whatever's in his head is like 10 times more complicated. It can't be mapped in 2 dimensions. What's in Reid's head, that's for sure. 2 dimensions is not sufficient.
I don't think I was asking you, William.
Oh, well.
Yeah, that is the basic structure. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm trying to learn Reid's structure. There's still parts of it that I just don't grasp yet. But he's slowly teaching.
Fascinating. Okay, sir, let's keep going.
So ultimately, it is all subjective. At the same time, I see it as if you have 2 people with 2 completely different views on subjective good, if they both sit and really try to understand each other, I think they would ultimately come closer to the objective good. So I see no one person knows what the objective good actually is. So it is all subjective. Even though it is all subjective, I don't think that rules out the possibility of an objective good.
Interesting, yeah. Like a lot of moral statements, it's important to understand what the objective is before you can say whether a particular course of action is morally good or bad. So yeah, I like that. So you're saying if we could agree on what the actual... I hate so you're saying. It's such a bad statement. Never say it. Don't just even if the sentiment's right. All I'm doing is trying to re-clarify what you're saying. But so you're saying is like it I think I'm hearing is a way better way of saying the exact same thing, where it doesn't feel like you're putting that person in a box.
Yeah, take it on yourself.
Yeah. I think you're hearing, and I could be wrong about that. So yeah, which is the sentiment's exactly the same, but it's just a stupid way of framing it. And again,
taking on yourself is better rhetoric.
Yeah,
100%. Term rhetoric in this case.
Yeah,
but I think that's a comparatively small thing, because you can, if you follow that up with, if you say, so you're saying, then you say what you think you're hearing, and then you end that with, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Then that immediately takes away the statement that is what you are saying, period. You're asking, so you're saying, is that right? Or is that what you are saying?
It's the mechanics of telling them, though. You're not asking them what they're saying. You're telling them what they've just said, as if you're. And again, it's a really small thing, but I think it's just such an easy thing to get rid of and say I'm hearing instead of it. And I hated it. I hate where I hear it. Me saying it here. It's like, why
just switch around 2 words? So are you saying?
Instead if anybody wants to really learn the lesson, I'm not a huge Jordan Peterson fan, but obviously the infamous Jordan Peterson and what's her name, Kathy Newman. Kathy Newman, thank you. Interview that's the best inoculation against ever saying so you're saying again. I'd say
she ruined that phrase for everybody from here on.
Goddamn, yeah, phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, so -1 over pi points.
Situation is. And where we need it to get to, we could also therefore agree on what would be considered objectively good about in the context of those agreements. So, does that make sense? Sorry.
That's okay. I got a little distracted. Do you mind repeating the last few?
Oh yeah, no problem. Okay, so this is so goodness is often is like a moral assertion essentially. And I think what I'm hearing you say, and for I would agree with you. I think that if 2 people can agree where we currently are and where we need to get to, we can start to talk about a good path to get there. So we can say something objectively true about what is good in the context of getting to our objective.
Can we pause again?
Yeah.
But if we can,
I thought that was interesting because at first when he asked you to repeat the last thing you said, when you started repeating it, I thought, okay, now you're explaining things again. But then you said, so what I'm hearing you say is, and I thought, oh no, okay, I like that, what I'm hearing you say. And then you follow that up with, and I would agree with you.
Yeah, that I agree with you was unnecessary. I was just trying to again, it was encouragement, but
it's fascinating what that can do. Like suddenly there is some sort of pressure or some sort of
judgment.
A judgment element in there, and you are not as free as you would be to answer, oh, I agree or I do not agree with, or that is not what I'm saying. But yeah,
it almost becomes a subtle indicator that some part of this conversation is about me pleasing me. That there's a weird dynamic where you're either going to say things that you can now understand that I might agree with, or you might be courting my disapproval.
Mm-hmm.
And people, it's a subtle form of persuasion, right? It's maybe not that subtle actually. You're absolutely right. I hate these little. It's just if you look at the things that I've said wrong here, really it's like 4 words, but they're so disruptive to what take those 4 words out, and it's such a better example of what we're trying to do. It's really interesting. This is like, honestly, I've often wondered what it's like going through one of these review shows, and it is exactly as painful as I suspected it probably is. Just listening back to your past self like this is just absolutely atrocious.
Me, this is zero pain. I'm having no problem. What up?
this is the most fun I've had in all week. But no, I think it's a really good learning experience because probably especially when you see yourself making these mistakes and you are being criticized or judged.
No, I think it's one of the
yesterday at UCLA. That's just a tease.
Yeah, no, I think honestly these review exercises are awesome. I think they're a huge part of growing and like hammering home those lessons. I can hear myself doing it, but like having to go through this painful exercise of having these mistakes exercised in public is good. It's good. It's healthy.
But if we can't agree where we are, like if we disagree about what the current situation is, and we can't agree about our destination, then we can't agree about what is a good path to take to get to that destination.
Yeah.
That was a message.
Oh yeah. It was a reclarification of an initial. Yeah, that this whole section was a bit wobbly.
Yeah. And messages only cost in terms of.
Well, I'm not sure
something. So it's zero messaging is not necessarily the goal.
I'm not sure it was a message. I think some of this might have gotten lost here because all I'm really trying to do is re-clarify what I think I heard him say in the previous section. So it is a message, but I think what I'm trying to do is just steel man his message, if that makes sense.
Because you said you agreed with it
earlier, then I agree. Yes, that was
qualified immunity of I'm just reflecting.
See, here's what I've noticed. Yeah. I'm losing all of these points, not because necessarily there are many mistakes, but because we keep pausing, we keep rediscovering the mistake.
Oh, yeah. Well, we keep knocking you down small numbers of points. I actually do have a positive category over here. I just haven't been stopping to share it yet, and I'll get to it.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
And I really think, in those scenarios, see, this isn't a common thing in society, but I do think, if we can't agree on a destination, like I think it's important for both of us to allow ourselves to separate, which you already did at the beginning of the video, as opposed to forcing the other person to try to have the same goals as me,
Right. Well, we can certainly recognize that we all have different perspectives and experiences and see the world differently, and therefore that might we would expect that therefore to result in different ideas about what might be good in this moment.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think the perfect example of that is politics. Like we all want a better society, but there's obviously huge disagreements there.
Yes. And different motivations. And that's a great example. So bringing this a little bit back to God, how do you see God plays a role in the idea of what is good in your view?
So I am open to the idea that potentially God does leave signs, or when somebody really has stuck to trying to figure out what good is, he'll help them through those scenarios. I guess here's an example. The other day I was let me know if you can't hear me because there's a car that's pulling up, but
we're all good.
The other day there was this lady in the parking lot, and I normally don't give money to people, but she specifically asked for $2, so I gave her the $2 because I gave her $2 because all I had was $2 on my wallet, so I gave it to her because it's the exact amount I had, and then she started crying. I know this is by no means proof, but I then asked her what it was, and she really wanted to buy her son a pizza. And I actually believe she was being honest with me. But see, I mean, that literally could have just been complete coincidence.
It sounds like a beautiful moment. I mean, it sounds, you made a connection with a stranger. You made them feel good. You helped them out in a moment when they needed it to. You didn't ask for anything in return, and that sounds like a really sweet thing to do.
So up points. You were slow and you heard him out. You didn't jump in very quickly, and he evidenced a reflection and even a reconsideration of the attribution all on his own. So there's at least 50 points right there just for shutting up.
Clearly, behavior you wish to see more of in the which I can appreciate. I think Jonathan's doing 90% of the reflection of his own back here. I don't think, as you say, he said that this may not be an example of God working, and he explained that whilst he saw the light, that he was in a compromised state. His self-awareness is really admirable, I think, and although he still seems to hold some strong conclusions, I think partly what I was trying to do here was focus on the small things before we start to get to the big things. Clearly later, I think he took, and I think actually earlier he mentioned that he was sort of exploring maybe a polytheistic view of the world, or at least that there was a presence, or this God entity was sort of present to him in this moment, and these are all like quite large claims, which are really valuable territory for an SE conversation. But I think there was something about this moment that clearly was important enough to him to mention that I thought was really worth exploring. And I think this is one of the characteristics of it not being an SE conversation, because to me, this was really interesting, because he said he sort of feels like the existence of goodness is tied to his God belief, that the presence of his God belief has created this opportunity for him to see this goodness. And I think that was the claim that I was the most interested in exploring here, because I felt like it would be a good foundation for later conversations.
But how does that make it not SE?
I don't know, because I'm not sure whether or not it wouldn't be more SE to ask him to just give his reasons, not justify, sorry, give his reasons for some of the other things he's claimed. The presence of the light in his room, for example, the existence of the God in the first place. Here we go, the Matrix.
Oh, hold on, it's growing.
Yeah, with the $2 thing, I added now just a general category for personal experiences, now that we have multiple of them.
Yeah.
And now we have the $2 one, and I'm hearing assumptions that it's like he only had $2 in his wallet. That's an empirical fact, but here's an abstract assumption: is this is a highly improbable situation. That might have been an assumption he could have made.
Yep.
And then the best explanation for that situation was God.
That branch is very specifically the branch we then spend the rest of the video mostly exploring. And I would say the key evidence to him was this existence, the correlation between the $2 being how much he had and the $2 being what the lady was asking for. And there were two things that I was trying to do here. One of them was to explore his reasoning for that being possibly, because again, he's not saying this is definitely God, right? So I was very careful not to say, that he thought this was God, because he's been careful to say that it might not be an example. But the other thing I was interested in doing is I wanted to try to encourage him to reflect on whether or not he needed a God in order to see this goodness in the world, because I thought that was actually useful for him. I think one of the things that from an SE perspective, we want people to have better epistemologies, because in general, regardless of whether any of us know what the truth is, having a better epistemology generally leads to a better framework for moving through life. And so I think that the claim that goodness exists in the world, or that he can gain value from exploring goodness in the world, shouldn't be contingent on the existence of a God. And I think if he could psychologically just separate those two ideas and recognize that even without a God, he can still value and appreciate goodness in the world, then I think that would be a really useful exercise to try to explore. So that's I guess kind of how the conversation went from that point.
Yeah, I think for an interview or for a conversation to be an SE conversation or interview, that doesn't mean you have to focus on, like, I don't know, the typical claims that usually people talk about when doing SE. I think it's usually useful to focus on what you personally find interesting, what you want to explore with them, as long as you are not doing it only because you find it interesting, but also, or the main objective is that you want to inspire reflection, you want to get them to think about their belief and their reasoning. I think it's totally fair to ignore one claim and focus on another.
Yeah, I know, Dali, you've said in the past that you like the idea of seeing a small, relatively minor, harmless almost claim as a starting position for them maybe being able to explore more complex claims. And I think in some ways there's an echo of that in what I'm doing here in choosing. But I also think, honestly, that it might sound silly, but I feel like in many ways the presence of goodness in this, or this person's ability to form a relationship with something that might give him positive experiences, is perhaps actually more meaningfully important to this person than whether or not he believes that it's divinely inspired or not. I kind of want him to be able to see and experience goodness in the world and feel value in those things, in positive interactions with people. And I kind of want him to do that irrespective of whether or not he continues to believe in a theistic God or not, because it sounds like it's actually a positive experience for him. And that's kind of how we explore this. It's like there are selfish reasons to want to do good things in the world, that we don't have to be motivated by God.
It was...
Oh, sorry. All right. Put it back in.
No. well timed. No, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I definitely felt like I connected with her there.
Cool. So how might you feel? I'm hearing that you're not sure that this was a particularly good example of maybe God acting in this narrative, but how, if you were to think it, how would you see God might have acted in this idea of what had just happened?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, it's just also because I guess what you're asking is like, did God somehow work it out to where she specifically needed $2 and that I specifically somehow had $2? Yeah, I mean,
that's what I love about these. Yeah, that's what I love about these God moving in sort of acting in the world claims, is that if you really think about a lot of them for a moment, what God is actually necessarily orchestrating here is astronomically complicated, and is clearly deriving an awful lot of people of free will, and I think I don't know if it's here or a bit later on, I make the point, and he's doing all this all in service of you, if that's what we believe. He's doing this with you in mind only. That it's quite a remarkable claim, I think, and I kind of do like unpacking that. And it was really, again, I totally commend Jonathan, because he took what I said and he went with it where I was hoping to go. But he did it on his own, and I think that was it's commendable and really helpful when you've got a conversation partner that's sort of following you and if anything leading you through your own inquiry.
Well, yeah, I think I might need to step back for a second, because I used to would have said that everything was just a chain reaction. I would have said that let's say we had an incredibly huge computer that it pretty much was God, that happened to exist back in the Big Bang. So I even believed in the atheist, even if there was no God and atheism was right. I still think it all would have been chain reactions. But now I'm open to the idea. I guess I should have said this. If the computer was back at the Big Bang when the Big Bang was happening, I would have said it would have been able to predict this exact moment. But now I don't necessarily believe in that. I believe more in free will. I believe everything's not set in stone.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So, I mean, exactly how God might have worked, how God would have, like, maybe God gave her a feeling to say the $2 thing. Because I'll say this, I actually think I did have the choice to not give her the $2.
Right.
But I do think the fact that she said $2 is what encouraged me to say yes. So
Did
it's
she
like,
say-
what would have had to happen to get her to say $2?
In the first telling of the story, I did not hear her say $2.
No, she did. He said that she did ask
asked
specifically for $2. Yeah.
$2? Okay.
Yeah.
For
I missed it.
$2, and he only had $2 on him, and there was some sense of that coming together for him that meant it felt. And again, I want to be careful, because Jonathan did say when he recounted this story that this might not even be an example of God acting in the world. And you know, he's not claiming certainty that this is exactly what happened, and it was all part of God's plan. And so I have invited him to explore what it would mean if that was the case. And so he's kind of reflecting on that.
Okay.
Because she might have just asked for money, or yeah, I think it all depends on how do cosmic forces affect our brain and the decisions we make, and I have no idea.
It's a great answer. I have no idea either. Yeah, that would be a great answer. So what reason might we have to believe?
Is I don't know an answer. It's a response to a question. I don't know if it's an answer.
It's an answer.
Well, yeah, I think it's an answer, but I always want to commend my conversation partners for saying I don't know, and I think like he was reflecting and he said he didn't have an answer, and I think that's fine.
It's a good answer, and it's good that you said that you thought it was a good answer, reply, response, whatever. I think the question wasn't good because it was a loaded question. How do cosmic forces affect our behavior, our lives, something like that?
Well, that was his question to himself, wasn't it? That
right,
wasn't my,
right. That was yeah. I wasn't. For once,
I thought I was
wasn't
going to lose
judging
points
you.
for.
No, for once I wasn't judging you, William. Don't get paranoid now. No, I think his question was loaded because he was assuming that I don't know exactly what he means by cosmic forces. That would be interesting to find out. But yeah, he seems convinced that cosmic forces, whatever that is, do affect our lives. And his question now is, how does that happen?
Right. Yeah, again, one of the tricky things about this conversation almost felt like there were too many, again, embarrassment of riches, too many conversations we could follow. Free will versus determinism was clearly, is a fairly classic one. How can he know that these forces exist at all? Relationship with the light, etc. I do agree. I think I'm trying to stick to the $2 example at this point as much as possible, because I just think coming back to that and exploring that to its conclusion is probably is the path I favored anyway.
Makes sense.
But yeah, I agree.
Reid, please control the video. I'll be back in a few minutes.
Okay.
That God had intervened in that scenario that you described, and again, I recognize you weren't sure whether this was something that would be pointing to God or not, but what part of it was it? Just the coincidence of that you happened to have $2 and she happened to be asking for $2? That coincidence seemed to be more than just a coincidence to you, and maybe suggested that there was some intervention at play.
Yeah, I guess.
Shouldn't have said just there. Was it just this? That it was such a dismissive. It was really unfortunate. He didn't challenged me on it, but it's a silly mistake.
More of the fact that she cried, that to me was more of, I don't want to use the word proof. I wish I knew another word, as more of, if there was any evidence, is more of that to me was the more of the evidence that I made the right decision, or that it wasn't coincidence. But it's still not quite evidence.
Yeah, it's cool. So I think it sounds like a really beautiful moment. Like, it sounds like you made a sort of, important human connection with somebody at a moment where they just needed something, and you were able to help them, and they were very grateful for that. And I think that's quite a powerful little moment. And I don't know, I guess there are different ways we could look at this. We could say that somehow God made it so that this lady needed $2 and was upset about that. And we could say that God also conspired to making sure that for some reason you happen to only have $2 in your pocket at the time. And that this was an elaborate test that was somehow all about you and God wanting to understand how you would react under these circumstances. Now, I don't think we could disprove that. Like, as you say, cosmic forces may be at play, and that we couldn't say for sure that they weren't. We could be in a simulation. You talked about a computer at the beginning of the Big Bang. Maybe we're in a computer game. Maybe this is all a simulation, and maybe there is somebody manipulating the parameters of the computer game such that they are engineering scenarios and testing what people, whatever we are, might do under certain circumstances. I couldn't prove to you that wasn't the case.
Sending messages.
It's also,
Yeah, you're framing it as two different positions, potentially.
well, I guess I'm just exploring the reasons why we might not know with certainty, I guess, what's going on in our reality, right? That there are the existence of God. I think it's useful to concede that the existence of God is a logically sound hypothesis, in the sense that, if we presuppose it, presuppose as in it explains the phenomenon, right? Given the woolly definitions and everything, it doesn't explain the existence of God, and it's not. I don't know about you guys, but I don't feel like I know that there is no God. The existence of a God would certainly explain the existence of reality and all the things that are going on. If there was a being that was this powerful, sure. The question, and the question I'm about to ask, it really is there any reason to believe any of these things are true? As in, there are lots of potentially extraordinary circumstances that would explain the observed phenomenon. So the question really is, given all of these potentially quite extraordinary explanations, which one should we feel more confident in?
Yeah.
So I think the brain in the vat, or the matrix argument, for example, as an equal example to the God claim, is a useful one, because it says that you can acknowledge the existence of a God, but then you could also say, hey, even non-deity type explanations could be used in this space, I think.
Right, but you're inserting them. They're not coming from him.
No, I agree, and this is becoming a conversation at this point, and less an interview, let's say. But like, I think what I'm trying to do here is actually, if anything, move it more into an SE space. He's made a lot of agreements anyway. I said not agreements, but he's explained that he's not certain about any of this stuff. So I'm saying that given that there are multiple competing explanations for the possible existence of our reality and the phenomenon we appear to observe, what should we do with these multiple competing possibilities? And I think it becomes more about an epistemology claim now.
Yeah, maybe there's more opportunity for reflection if you ask the broad question, what are the other alternative explanations for what?
That would have been a much better question. Yeah.
To explain.
Yeah.
Just possible that the $2, the amount, was just a coincidence. And it's possible that you just made a stranger very happy and did a kind thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's completely possible as well. Would it be helpful if I brought up other scenario, or should we stick with this one?
I think we can move on in a second, but I would just like to point out, like, I think the question that's interesting about this now is there any reason to believe? Not, but we can't. I will fully agree. We cannot disprove, God had intervened in this scenario, and I cannot disprove that we're not in a computer game. Maybe we're in an alien computer somewhere, and they're simulating all of this and doing experiments on our. Maybe we're all brains in a vat in some weird dystopian future. Or maybe we're something that neither of us have ever imagined before, and that whatever's going on is beyond our understanding or imagination. Maybe all of these things are true. Maybe there's a God, and God is engineering this. All of these things are potentially possible, and I couldn't disprove them. But is there any reason to believe that they're true?
Yeah, so
That was the most ridiculously long-winded way of saying
the main reason I believe it is mostly because of that experience in November, and most of the experiences I've been having since then. Like, I've been, as an example, I've been able to go without alcohol since February now. I only drank once since then, and which still doesn't prove it either, because it is like, because it could be placebo, My reason, I guess you asked what reason for me to believe it. A reason for me to believe that there is a God, and I still use the word God loosely because it can mean a bunch of different things.
Sure.
But I do think the reason I believe
That is another thing. Is this the Christian God? What God are we talking about?
No, he said at the beginning that it wasn't really a God, and he was open to the idea of pantheistic worldview.
Okay.
So yeah, he's kind of he kind of did allude to that at the beginning. Although to be fair, and again to Janosch's point earlier, I could have definitely done with checking his definitions about what he meant by these things.
Didn't he say polytheism? Theism? No.
Oh, sorry, I meant polytheism. So I said pantheism.
Yeah.
Shoot, am I losing points for this conversation as well? Shit! Like how this is why Reid has the Miro board up, is he's got to keep track of this matrix of points I'm losing.
Well, me personally, I'm a Dali theist, but that's just me.
I've told you about that white bearded guy no.
It's the beard. It's definitely the beard. I think it sounds like what Jonathan is saying is he came up with this example of where he could potentially see God at work, the influence of God in his life. And this was the first thing that came to mind. And now I'm hearing him say, well, that might not be the best example.
He said this at the beginning, to be fair. So I just want to clarify. He did say, even before he gave this example, this might not be actually an example of this. So, yeah.
But yeah, so this could have been a good opportunity to ask him to take some time and think about the best example that he could come up with that would demonstrate this. Not any other one that he can think of, but the best one that think of.
Yeah. Yeah, I forget where the conversation goes at this point, but I didn't ask that question, and it would have been a good one.
You can take over, Dali. I'm doing Miro things.
Also, Dali, can you put yourself at the top again? Because I'm getting confused because you were up there before. And now, okay, who's Dali now? And also, because I'm a Dali theist, I want you to be
at the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
It is because by me believing in it, even if it is placebo, I do think it is bringing me to a place where I interact with the world in a more positive way for myself and the world. But that, I think it's more than that, because if it's not true, I mean, ultimately, this is the ultimate truth. I don't know whether it is or not. I keep searching, though. I think this is an important detail to add up to. This God belief, the main thing that affects my life is I spend a lot of time researching ancient religions, particularly Judaism and Egyptian, because apparently Judaism borrowed a lot from Egypt, which makes perfect sense. But I think the main reason I do is just the main reason I'm pursuing this idea of God is to really figure out if God is really there.
Sure.
Yeah.
I really, one thing I just want to say is, like, I really value you saying you don't know, like, as often as you are doing. I think that's, like, there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, and we often feel compelled to find an answer or reach for an answer when maybe not only do we not have sufficient reasons to reach for the answer, but also maybe we don't actually need to reach for the answer.
Yeah.
And I can give you an example of that I like to use quite
Before
a lot.
I give my
which
silly
is,
example, I wanted to
the
just point out, like, there's a couple of things. I definitely think there's an appeal to I think you put the little banner up where the notion of life change for Jonathan here. Like, his life has clearly changed direction as a result of these experiences that he's had, and I think that it's been a really positive and valuable thing in his life. It seems to have had a positive effect on him, and he seems to be quite enjoying who he is. And there is a component to which I'm a little bit concerned about, not wanting to knock out that support system that's having this positive impact on his life. And it's a concern that I've had in the past when had these conversations. It's there's a moment where you think, might this be a better position for Jonathan to be in this moment than to be one that's sort of certainly calling into question all of these things. And that's an interesting component of it. And I think there's another component of this, which is one of these sort of framing effects of I hear quite a few people talking about a sort of vague religious narrative, like in the way that Jonathan's doing here, not specifically Christian or Sikh or Hindu or Buddhism or Islam. He's talking about a sort of a sense of there being a religious component to the world and trying to find that. And that when I talk to people that express this view, you will often hear them talk about having read an awful lot of books. Often ancient Egypt comes up, but it's not the only one. They spend a lot of time reading about gods. They spend a lot of time reading about religions. They connect the dots with the history. And I think that as a result, I would be surprised if people didn't start to see, sort of godlike entities. If you're immersing yourself in that material, in that world. It's not a point that I made with him in this conversation, but I think it's certainly something I've reflected on before when I've had conversations with people like this. That there's a sort of seek and ye shall find component to this, and when they do seek, they do tend to find something. And I'm not sure if that's necessarily as a result of research so much as it is the framing effect.
I am pretty sure that I could find mystical connections that prove Mickey Mouse is God. All I have to do is allow my confirmation bias to then go scanning, and I can find evidence for anything if I'm allowed tenuous connections. No problem.
Right.
Yeah. I want to make a side comment here. Some noob says, even about the best example, even if provided time, I think most people would not actually generate an example in the moment they would look back and be satisfied about. Yes, that's a feature.
That's a very good point. Also, hey, Sam noob.
Yeah. That's a feature, not a bug. I do expect that when we put somebody on the spot, but we ask them for the best, they will end up thinking later and coming up with a better one, which is to inspire reflection.
Right. And also it's perfectly fine to just come up with, at least they take the time to reflect and come up with one, not the first one that comes to mind, but think, how many can I think of? How would I rank them? Is there what makes them one example better than the other? Those
Yeah.
are things that happen when you ask this question, and I don't think the purpose of the question is to make sure that you actually get the very best example of all the ones that they have.
Yeah, I think an example of that going wrong would be if they fail to be able to explain their best example, and then you say, "Well, there you go, victory," and I will walk away. You know, that's clearly not the objective. I think you're right. The objective really is, if anything, to help them focus on the criteria. What does it mean for it to be a good example, as you say? Yeah, that's good. That's a great point.
Universe reality as it is either infinite, which I can't get my head around. As a human being, I can't get my head around the infinity of the universe, right? It's just, I can say the word infinity and I know what it means, but I don't have any kind of comprehensive understanding of what that might mean. How can something really truly be infinite? That's baffling to me. Or the universe is finite, which means it had a beginning and that there was something. I mean, again, that doesn't make any sense to me. How can there be a before reality? And how can there be an after reality potentially? So if it's infinite, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I can just be open about that and say that I don't understand it. And if it's finite, it doesn't make any sense to me, and I can be okay with just saying like that I don't understand it. Or the reality or the universe is something else. It's some other thing, and that doesn't make any sense to me. If something's neither infinite nor finite, I don't know what it is, and it doesn't make any sense to me. And so the only thing I can say for certain about my understanding of reality and the universe and how it all works is that I know I don't understand it. And it might not be very comforting, but it's quite relaxing just recognizing that. And that's not to say that we shouldn't try to understand it or we shouldn't try to learn more. But I think it's surprising to me how few people are willing just to recognize the obvious truth, which is that we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
I was really relieved about that because
that
whole thing was a massive message delivery. But I like that example because for me, I use that example a lot, and I think it's a good way of explaining, like, honestly, because unless you're prepared to say that you do understand the answers to the infinity, finite nature, or otherness of the reality that we're living in, then you don't have a fully comprehensive explanation, and so it's okay to say you don't know. Like many theological terminations to the infinite regression of reality say, well, God did it, but then of course the moment you say, well, where did God come from? Well, then suddenly God's infinite, and so you're just terminating a finite series with an infinite force. It's sort of no answer at all, and I think that it's a useful reflection to acknowledge that no answer to the origin of reality, and I use reality and not the universe, but no answer to that question really is satisfying. Like I can't understand any of them.
If you're gonna message,
Reid's on mute, by the way.
Go ahead,
if
Dali.
you're gonna message, I think messaging in favor of critical thinking and intellectual humility is probably the one I'm going to score you down the least for. So I might actually score you up on it because you've heard me say I am an evangelist for critical thinking. So if I'm going to be trying to persuade, if I am evangelizing, if I am trying to encourage a particular thing, that's the thing I'm after.
I'd like to take your generous interpretation, but I'm not sure that I was evangelizing for critical thinking. I think part of that, I think I could have framed it better and it'd be cleaner. Humility, yes, for sure.
The intellectual humility part of saying I don't know, praising the
Right.
I don't know, is a positive in my personal book.
Yeah, mine too. Yeah, I like that.
Quick, just to touch on something you mentioned.
One point is I don't know is only a good answer if there are no good explanations for some question. But I don't know if he's claiming that this is the case for God. He may say God is the best explanation for some stuff. So that I don't know is not a good answer at this point.
He's said, I think fairly consistently, he's said that in the previous part, he was talking about the fact that he's kind of unsure and he's seeking for a God. He's trying to understand it, and again, I'm just trying to encourage him to recognize that not being certain is a perfectly valid position here. As in, I would rather he didn't know than he knew for sure that there was a God, for example, or in fact knew for sure that there was anything.
Yeah.
I think it's just, yeah.
I can agree that I don't know is only a proper conclusion if further investigation is impractical. But I think I don't know when you don't know, even if there is a real answer just over there that you haven't looked, is still good for intellectual humility. Now, whether that's an answer to the question or what, we could talk about that.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know is the start of curiosity, of exploring, discovery, growth. Yeah. All of that.
I don't know is the start of every scientific enterprise.
Yes.
I understand Reid's point, though. There are definitely places where I guess I don't know could be actually intellectually dishonest. It could be a denial of like, you know, hey, look at all this evidence, and now what is your conclusion? Well, I just don't know. It's like really, there could be a component of that, and also I guess like I don't know could be an answer to a question that inherently is fallacious to begin with, right? Like I don't know if God could lift a weight that, you know, or could create a weight that was heavy enough that even he couldn't lift it. You know, I don't know is a perfectly valid answer to that, but also you might start to question whether or not the framing of the question put you in the realm of sense in the first place. So maybe there are places where I don't know isn't useful for sure. But I think in general it's my second favorite answer. Well, I think it's probably my favorite answer. Mentioned before, which was like you mentioned that these experiences have led to you interacting in the world in a more positive way, and I think that's and I'm glad about that. I'd also like to ask you to maybe reflect on this slightly strange question, which is why. Sorry to everybody watching at home. This is actually happening in the real video, so to interact with in the world in a positive way. It gets better.
We'll all pitch in for a better internet connection.
Yeah, so you kind of broke up on me, but I believe you asked, how has it led to me interacting with the world in a positive way?
Actually, slightly differently. I was asking why is it better that you are interacting with the world in a positive way?
Yeah, yeah, it might help if I clarify how I was interacting with it in a negative way. I used to be somebody who just drank all the time, and to me, it's like if I was hedonist, it was like pleasure. So to me, sex was like, I felt like sex was the whole point of existence. You know, it's like that's the best feeling thing there is. So I might as well try to get as much of that as possible. Also, if somebody was a jerk, it's like I would just be a jerk back. I would flip people off when I was driving. I would curse at people all the time. I guess. But yeah, so why is it better that I'm not doing those things now?
Right.
Yeah, so there's two parts of me speaking up right now. Like one is the nihilist part, which is like, hey, there's no point. Who cares? Let's just be chaotic. I guess to me, earlier you said, you know, why should, I think you said, maybe we don't need to find, if there is a divine being that's infinite, you know, maybe we don't have to find it. And I agree with that. I'm not going to pressure anybody into try to look for it. I think ultimately, I will say this: I wasn't necessarily happy how I was before, and I don't know if I can come up with an answer for why the positive is better until I possibly learn more, because I don't even know if this thing's if it's one God or if it's multiple gods.
Well, before that was really weird. Let's look at that comment at the end there. Like that really threw me, because like it felt like he was reflecting on, like, I kind of was trying to encourage him to think about like if these things actually result in better, like if he's evaluating him being a better person as being better, like that evaluation is useful, right? In any case, regardless of what the genesis of it is. Like you can say, okay, even if I'm wrong about the existence of a God, I can still say that objectively, entirely subjectively, I feel like acting in this way is better for me. And so I would have reasons to continue to do so, even if there was no God. And then I was really thrown, I think, at the end of that sentence when he was like, he seemed to be sort of struggling to, I think, articulate or sort of come to the thought that, of what made it good. And then he then was like, we don't even know what this thing is. Maybe it's polytheistic or monotheistic. Seemed to really drag it back down to that being an important component of the question, which really surprised me because I didn't feel like it was. And there are these. It's little moments like that with this conversation that kind of surprised me, because in some moments it was the case that he's really open, reflective, and really, he's willing to say he doesn't know and he's not certain. And then in other places, like he made the very strange move to sort of bring ground it as if this whole time really this is an inquiry into the nature of God rather than the nature of the experience of being good. So that really threw me.
I think for him, good is just God with an extra O. In terms of if it doesn't relate to God or God's wishes, he doesn't want to call it good. He doesn't even want to think that there's an advantage in not flipping people off.
And that's the claim in essence that I think I'm trying to address. That's the claim I'm seeing, if there is one here, is it necessary for there to be a God in order for goodness to be worthwhile, doing good things to be worthwhile?
And I'm going to talk directly to the audience and say, and this is a real good example of what Anthony would call red meat. Jonathan is hanging an opportunity for the SEer to start arguing that point and get distracted. And my memory is that you don't go grinding on that point.
No.
And good job on you for that. So
okay,
at least an extra 20 points for not biting red meat or falling into that trap.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm hesitant to add to that. I was also going to commend you. No. I was going to commend William for another thing, but now you already got points from Dali. But yeah, I was going to tell you, I really liked, not just now, but also earlier, you really embraced the pause and you really listened to Jonathan thinking about thinking about it, reflecting on it, trying to come up with an answer, trying to put it into words, and you never interrupted. And that I really like these parts of the conversation.
Yeah, I thank you. I appreciate that. I think the whole point is to encourage people to think about things. So if they're thinking about things, interrupting them seems very antithetical to your ambition, right? So yeah, I appreciate that.
And yet, so many people do it.
It's sorely tempting, and I know I will definitely do it probably in the next 5 minutes in this video. Probably.
If you notice a good place for us to stop and leave the audience hungry to go watch the video itself, let us know, because
sure,
we're in the last half hour of our intention.
How long is the video is left?
Oh, well, I'm looking at, we are 30 minutes 26 out of a video that is a little over an hour. So at our current rate, we wouldn't get through it before I'll lose interest.
You've maintained interest this long. Well, I'm happy. Honestly, yeah, I don't recall the video well enough to know where there's a good place to park, but I will welcome any suggestions to that.
All of us look for a good place to say, "Ooh, that's a tasty one to end on."
The experience that you had with the lady and the $2, right? So in that experience, like you certainly would have felt, I'm sure, that you had at least two options of how you could act. You could have continued to walk past her and ignored her. That would have been hedonistic. It would have been self-serving. It would have been you would have been $2 richer. You wouldn't need to care what she thought. Or you could have given her the $2 that you had in your pocket. And you could have seen her reaction and maybe felt something in response to that reaction.
And I guess one question I would ask is, which do you think of those two scenarios was better for you, or would have been better for you?
I do think giving her the $2 was better for me.
Right. It sounds like it was a nice experience.
Yeah.
I'm not sure in America, the way the economy is, that $2 could get you much of a better experience.
Yeah.
Comments about the British economy right now are very welcome, of course. Or lack thereof.
Maybe you could frame that in terms of like, how can we live a virtuous life? One option is to believe in this God because it gives you a sense of purpose. It imbues it on you. It makes the entire reality purposeful, and you're just a part of it. Or you can just hypothesize other ways of being a virtuous person in life, going through it. In this situation of the person asking for $2,
Yeah.
you know,
I think I was trying really hard not to address the theological question, and deliberately I was very focused on trying to disconnect the value of the positive experience with the theological claim. Like maybe this was not the right way to go, but I felt like the priority for me was in this conversation to make him feel, or get him to recognize that there was an intrinsic value in doing the right thing and doing a good thing, and something that he's benefiting from, and he can do that irrespective of the belief of God. And then we could talk about the belief in God and the reasons why he believes that. But like this it felt like it was useful to disconnect this, and yeah.
I think it might have been useful or a good idea to find something that other people have as a motivation to do good things that he doesn't believe in, that he thinks is not true. And then ask, when they have a different motivation for doing good things, but they end up doing good things just like you, does that invalidate the fact that they're doing good things? Like an outsider test would. So if your
Can an
belief
atheist be
false,
moral? Yeah.
right. If you're you would have to confirm first that he thinks that atheists are wrong. He might not agree to that, even though he thinks that he believes in a God. But still, something that he believes is not true. And then, like an outsider, use that as an outsider test. Like with that, does the truth of the belief that is the motivation for doing good things, does that have an effect on the value of doing good?
Yeah, we do touch on this, and later he tells me that he feels that I would go to heaven even though I'm an atheist, that because he thinks I'm a good person, and that he feels like it wouldn't be right for me not to go to heaven, which is something I get quite often, and I think is meant kindly, but it sort of it's a weird judgment that people do, but yeah, I think we do go a little down that road, Janos. But yeah,
Cool.
it's a good point.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Do you mind if I switch a little bit on our perspective of good?
Sure.
From my perspective, I have a lot of atheist friends. And actually, one thing that converted me to atheism back when I was like 19 was I noticed some of the nicest people I knew were atheists. And to me, that's wild that there's a lot of atheists who are very inspired to do good, like humanists, and they'll do things like clean up the environment or start a charity. Or I know a lot of atheists who volunteer. It's in some ways you can almost say there's more atheists who do good than religious people, and there's a lot of theories we could drive off that. Like one could be like atheists, for one, it could maybe possibly in a way disprove religions, or I guess it's saying that somebody doesn't need religion in order to do good. I think that's the main thing it proves. But I don't know. I'm always amazed by when an atheist does good things.
Well, interesting. Again, I don't want to keep staying in the same place if you want to move on, but I do think this is a great example, because I think let's just say that it's possible.
Instead of this, I would ask the question, why? Why does that amaze you?
Yeah, I did find. I think it's sort of slightly hard to follow the thread when in these review shows, and I've noticed this before. Sometimes it's hard to sort of remember the cadence of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think I'm trying to bring him back, but yeah, I think that would have been a good question to ask for sure. Like, why is that so amazing? I've heard that before. But that doesn't mean I should assume that his answer would be the same as anybody else's. So yeah. Possible that you were wrong about this experience you had, this personal experience you had with the light, and that your understanding of it was a misunderstanding. But as a result of that misunderstanding, you've now noticed that you acted perhaps differently. I don't know. I'm assuming, but would you say that you're prior to having that experience, that the previous slightly hedonistic self would not have given the $2 to the lady, or do you think you would still have done that even before?
Hedonistic version of me would not have given it to her.
All right, cool. So you've now learned something about the world and how you could be interacting with it differently, that results in what you now are saying is a positive outcome for you. And I think even if you were wrong about your experience with that light and what that was, even if your interpretation of that was wrong, I still think that experience that you had with the $2 and the lady would still have been just as beneficial to you in doing what we might describe as the good thing. So when I started that sentence, it was supposed to be framed as a question to him, but when he clarified his position about what his past self would do, it turned into a statement, which was unfortunate because it was a better posed as a question. So in some ways, I wonder whether, if we think about this as something that God is doing, in some ways we might be missing the fact that maybe this is also something that you were doing, that this isn't just God acting through you to do something wonderful, but maybe this was just something you did and have noticed now that it was good. So I guess the question is, if we were to go back in time and we were to prove to you that somehow that experience that you had with the light was wrong, knowing what you know now about how giving the $2 to the lady felt, would you still want to give the $2 to the lady, even if you were to learn that the light wasn't what you thought it was?
I would still want to give it to her. I probably wouldn't enjoy it as much, though, I guess.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because as I'm like diving into this religion, I think part of it is humility, because they're giving the $2. The reason it felt so good was because it's like, well, there's something bigger than me that's going on here. And with but let's say if we got a time machine, we took me to a year ago, and I somehow was able to convince my old self to give somebody $2. And even if she did cry, I don't think I would have saw the beauty in it. Because back to the beauty in it is that there's something going on here that's bigger than myself, even though I don't understand what it is.
Can I say that as an atheist, as a lifelong atheist, I completely agree with that sentiment.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. Okay.
It's not. I thought this would be an interesting. Look at Reid's face. Can I just what is going on with Reid's face just there?
Yeah. We don't need to frame this in terms of atheism versus theism. You're an atheist. He's a theist. Keep it more collaborative. Figuring out how to answer questions that you both have.
Yes.
I have a question 2 steps back. I have a thing 2 steps back that I'd like to suggest. Well, you said, is it possible that God not, and if it was just you, then therefore, and you spoke your hypothetical. I think I can ask the same question without requiring that he agree that God not something, by saying, is there a balance? How the first question is, how much do you think God influenced the question, and how much was you? First of all, do you agree that both you and God had to want to do that? You're both some responsible. How much is your responsibility? How much is your action in the giving of the $2? And if I just look at that action, and now I'm looking at the part, but I'm not having to have him hypothetically say God didn't have anything to do with it while examining the usefulness of his part.
Yeah, so I think I might have confused the
sounded
question.
a lot better in my brain before I said it.
No, it's cool. I hear you. So the thing I thought that was a really big question for me in this conversation, and I didn't do a great job of it myself. But the basic idea was, if we were to assume that there was no God, would you still wish to have acted the way you did, knowing now what you know about how it felt? And so I guess what I'm trying to suggest is that having noticed that about the experience, like it's self-beneficial, like it's like even self-interestedly you would want to do that, right? Because that's the more positive of the 2 options that you have. Like that gives, like I said earlier, like the $2, that's a pretty good value judgment, value proposition for a $2 experience, right? So I think I'm just trying to, again, my main thing here is to try to emancipate the idea that goodness can exist even regardless of the existence of the God proposition, whether it's true or not. It doesn't. That's emancipated from the presence of this experience that's available to him.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a larger issue of meaning, because you're appealing to a hedonistic reason, and he's already articulated that hedonism is insufficient to live a good life.
Yeah, but I don't know that he had got all the way there. And I was really fascinated by, of course, the statement that he would have enjoyed it less if he hadn't. That there's a sense of, and then he mentioned humility a moment later. There was a slight essence of, don't mind me, I'm just doing God's work. It's just, pardon me, sort of humbly going about the business of enacting God's goodness in the world. There was something about that needed to, it seemed, to connect to this sort of slightly larger ambition, and I think that was really surprising to me, and also really interesting at this point in the conversation, was that there was this for Jonathan, there was this added value that he was getting, thinking that he was participating in this great theological scheme.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of points. You keep coming back to the experience with the light, and I think you asked something along the lines of if that hadn't happened, or if it turned out that experience was not what you thought it was. I think I would have let go of that example, or this reason that he gave why he believes in God. I would have gone with, if somehow you discovered that there was in fact no God, or you thought that because I think what it also does is he brought up the or he gave the example of going back in time with a time machine, and he was talking about his past self, and I think he judges himself pretty harshly looking back. And I think it's a lot more valuable to ask, let's say tomorrow or next week, you discover that there is no God, or the reasons that you have for believing that there is a God are not good. Now, would you then in the future, would you stop doing those good things? If you did this good thing, if you gave that lady the $2, would that take away from the experience?
Yeah,
And
I
he
think
might
that's
have said
he might have
said yes still, but yeah.
Yeah, you're right, because the nature. Yeah, just I think he did touch on the idea that the presence of the light was the main reason that he believed it was God, connected to this godlike concept, and that was something he mentioned just after we started talking about the $2 and the lady, and so it would have been much cleaner just to say, if we could prove hypothetically that there was no God, would you still act in the world? Would you still have done this? That would have, because there have happened a few times where in this conversation, as I say, Jonathan surprised me by sort of implying or importing some religious phenomenology or some component to it that was that sort of slightly blindsided me. So being that clear about it, saying, okay, let's assume there is definitely no God. Now, what would you still like to have given it? It would have been a lot cleaner. I agree. There's sort of 10 minutes left or so. Maybe now would be a good time to park it and pull it over.
I have one last thought.
Yes.
And I'm not nope, not doing it. I'm not sure. I think he explained the last thing that he said was he explained that if he didn't have the God belief, then it wouldn't have felt as good, or it wouldn't feel as good.
Yeah, something like that.
Because
he wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, I think.
Right. He wouldn't have enjoyed it as much because he wouldn't have felt like he was part of something bigger.
Yeah.
And you said after that, you said, I, as an atheist, I agree with that sentiment. And I'm not sure if he understood. It could have been misunderstood. I like you meant it in the way. I agree that they're doing these things. You feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. You have this. This is inspiring. This is something that drives me as well, right? And I don't need God for that. And I don't know if he understood it that way.
No, of course, yeah. That was kind of, in a sense, that was kind of almost deliberate to try to draw a sense. I think I got a sense that Jonathan was feeling a sense of wonder, of connectedness to something bigger than himself, and somebody who's very nihilistic, hedonistic, was living in that kind of headspace, suddenly feeling connected to a wider world, a wider universe, and being part of something huge, I think was very exciting for him. And I guess what I was trying to do was mimic his enthusiasm for that sentiment.
Yep.
But at the same time disconnect it from a theological necessity. Like I'm clearly not grounded, and that's kind of why I did specifically make it a theological versus non-theological. It was almost like holding for the theological component. You can still have this feeling, the same sentiment. You have access to this. But yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. So I guess I would like to ask you guys. I mean, obviously we haven't seen the whole thing, but how SE would you say this was on a scale of 1 to let's use the Solomon scale, 1 to 7?
I have a more complex scale that I'm going to answer the question with.
It's mauve and the smell of a freshly mown lawn in an English summerside out of 7.
In other words, I thank you for your question, and I'm going to answer a different one.
Kind of sure. Okay, so the way I want to process this question is I want to pull the panel on my 3 factors that I was talking about. Did any of us, did all of us, did each of us see examples of reflection inspired?
There was one point where it was pretty long pause. That was a good one. I can only see. I can only hear his voice.
You can only hear it. Okay.
Reflection or internet lag. It's a tough call. It could have been one of the.
I think Jonathan was reflecting the whole time, but a large amount of the whole time. I don't know how much of that I inspired, but I definitely think he was a really good conversationalist.
If you invite a situation and then they spend the entire time reflecting while you just don't interrupt
Sure.
it,
Sure.
I'm going to give you full points on that one. I think I observe a lot more than I think Reid observed in this, but maybe I'm just an easy grader. Janos, do you think that reflection was inspired?
Yeah, I think there was lots of reflection, and
Okay,
I think William had something to do with it.
Okay, so I'm just saying. Good enough. Didn't mess that up. Okay, good. So you get that one. The next one was rapport good, and for Janos and Reid was rapport good at the end of what you saw, and for me and William was rapport good at the end of the whole overall, because we've seen the whole thing. Rapport.
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, William, do you think rapport was good at the end?
Yeah, it was. We did a second video after this.
So that's unanimous. I think so too. And I'll even count it at the end of the second video as well. But however we're handling the scoring, that one's a yes. Okay, so we have 2 yeses. Now the third one is, and William has to answer last. Was William neutral enough to avoid distracting the process into defensiveness?
Yes.
Okay, Janos?
Yes. I would say if you had just asked the first part, was William neutral enough? Depends. Well,
that's assuming
there's
a lack of neutrality is the primary cause of lack of rapport.
Agreed. In this case, that's just that was the arbitrary standard that I chose at the beginning, so I want to stay with it. Because these are my points I'm giving out.
He did not get defensive. I think William could have been a lot more neutral and could have inserted a lot less of his own positions and messages. But yeah, it was.
Okay. And now that we have 3 upvotes, I don't care about Williams. You're outvoted. You can comment if you like, though. I'm not going to tell you to shut up.
No, you probably should, because I was going to agree with Janos. I'm not sure that it's a sufficient criteria. But I agree that it's what the ones you mentioned at the beginning. But I agree with the sentiment that I could have been more neutral. But also, I guess this was a long form conversation, right? Like this isn't sort of an SE 15-minute. The conversation went on for quite some time, and it was a conversation that we both agreed to participate in. So I think there was an essence of conversation about it outside of an SE interview, and perhaps that line shouldn't exist. Maybe I should have been more clear about it being an SE conversation, or perhaps there's value in it being a conversation and not actually a sort of a clinical case of SE. Perhaps, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. I think that's the main component I'm interested in your thoughts on.
Yes.
I think it could have been much longer, even with a clinical neutral SE.
Sure, true. Yeah, I guess
I was there. I let people just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. So I want to offer 10 to the power of my 3. So I give you 1,000 points, which means that your net points are a little over 900 with a lot of trailing digits.
Okay, excellent. I think that's good. I like the possibility that the answer was going to be in an imaginary number. That would have been good too. Yeah, that's guys. Yeah, I always appreciate these. I always enjoy these. It, as I say, is exactly as horrible reliving this as I thought it might be. And I have, if anything, more sympathy for the likes of Mark Solomon, who've gone through this crucible several times. But yeah, I really do want to say thank you to Jonathan, especially because he was such a great conversation partner. Really had really interesting views, and I really hope we get to do another one of these. So hopefully this hasn't upset that. I don't think it would have done, but yeah, it was a joyful conversation, and I still think there is an interesting question about whether how much this conversation is SE. Yeah, it was great. But yeah, I appreciate your feedback, guys, and thanks for the
Jonathan. If you're watching this, come let me interview you. I'm going to pay you twice as much as William if I can afford it.
Fair enough.
The only thing I pay is attention.
Oh, I like that. That needs to be on a t-shirt or crocheted onto a cushion somewhere. That's great. I like it.
Cool.
Yeah, it's good.
Awesome, guys. Thanks very
Any
much.
last thoughts? No,
It's fun.
Reid is going to trigger the
Doing
AI.
the wave. Doing the wave.
That happens.
All right.
Okay.